But first we go to Ukraine, where acting President Alexander Turchinov says it may be a few more days before an interim government is in place. That delay is also complicating efforts to deal with the country's urgent economic concerns. CCTV's Jack Barton has been following developments in Kiev. And Jack, there is deep concern over Ukraine's economic outlook. How serious are the country's problems?
Well, the country's problems are very serious. One of the problems is the collapsing local currency, the hryvnia. It fell to a record low again today against the US dollar. That is fueling fears of a run on the banks as people pull out the local currency to try and convert it into either US dollars or euros. But also it's making it harder for businesses and the governments to repay debts in other currencies. But the really big problem here is just the fact that the Treasury is almost empty and there are large debts outstanding, big debt repayments in June coming up. Different estimates on how much money the government needs. Some analysts saying $20 to $25 billion for this year and the next, but the interim finance minister saying it's $35 billion they need. Now, Catherine Ashton, the EU's foreign policy chief, was here in town today. She said EU member states were preparing bridging money, but that would only get it through to a big IMF loan, and that would take time. It's going to have strings attached. Already the country reneged on IMF conditions back in 2008, 2010, and the IMF loan would also almost certainly call for higher gas prices, and that would be deeply popular with Ukrainian citizens.
So, Jack, the EU coming up with some kind of bridging finance, but what are the longer-term, more permanent options to get Ukraine back on track?
Well, it's very tough. The first thing the government is going to try and do, of course, if it can secure those money, they're talking about education, really starting at the basic building blocks. So getting in education, trying to get the services sector booming, moving away from industry, moving away from the exports. You know, we saw that actually for the last 10 years, this country actually got away with a lot of the problems of the economy, relying on its old industry, because steel was so high. Some of those commodities were so high when China's economy was really hot. But since 2011, when the country was growing more than 5% GDP growth, those steel prices have collapsed by about half. So really that's getting this push now into the services sector, but also really into the basics, into education. And number one at the moment is going to be fighting corruption. That is absolutely considered to be endemic here, and until that is tackled, it's going to be very hard to move forward with any of those other reforms.
And what about the relationship with Russia? I mean, we know that these two countries don't get along on a political level, but they have a close relationship as far as the economy is concerned. Will the interim government coming into power in Ukraine be forced to adopt perhaps a more pragmatic relationship with Moscow? It is, after all, the main supplier of energy to Ukraine, and it's a possible source of bailout funds, isn't it?
Yeah, well, the economies are very much interconnected, but it is going to be hard for the interim government to have any sort of relationship with Russia, because yesterday we heard the Russian Prime Minister say that Russia wasn't going to recognize the interim government. So that will hopefully change after the presidential elections, but for the time being, Russia isn't recognizing the government. However, today, Sergei Lavrov, Russia's foreign minister, did soften that tone slightly. He said Russia had no intention of intervening in Ukraine, that it was going to leave it to its own affairs. But then no sooner had he said that, he said that if radical nationalists tried to take power or take the lead here, Russia would ensure that wouldn't happen. So it was kind of a conflicting message. Nonetheless, people here took it to mean there would be no military intervention, and that's been it's been a very real fear here. So that did calm things down a lot. But then we've also heard from Russia today that they may put a ban on imports of agricultural and food products, the logic being that if there's no government in place or there's still divisions and chaos and disorder here, they can't guarantee the safety of exports. But of course they could also call in their loans, or they could raise gas prices, or they could do both. So there's a lot of things people are expecting Russia to do that could certainly add pressure on the economy.
All right, thanks, Jack. Jack Barton there reporting from Kiev.